I wanted to so on the top of each addendum, right, we're going to tie it into the main purchase and sale contract by way of that purchase and sale contract's date in the top left-hand corner, the buyer's name, seller's names, and the address, right? And then we have a notice to the buyer that says, by including this addendum in the agreement, you agree to have your purchase price increased if the seller receives an equal or higher offer from another buyer, known as the competing offer. This addendum does not assure that the competing offer used to establish your purchase price will in all ways be comparable to yours. You are cautioned to offer no more than you are willing to pay for the property. You are further cautioned that seller or the listing broker may disclose the terms of your offer, including this addendum, to other potential buyers. And we've had that happen, many times over the years. Several, not many, but several times over the years, including one buyer who contacted the other buyer, paid them off to get out of the way so they could buy it from the seller for another price. And I thought that can't be done. And I called the legal hotline and said, Annie, they can't do this again. And she said, sure, they can. Yep, they can. And it's written in here as permission. So anyway, it's a very competitive market. I know I know that there was a situation I was talking to an agent about last night that was 18 offers that had come in, and one had come in at the last minute, all cash, and it's just a really competitive market. And so for buyers to get their buyer's offer accepted, an escalation addendum might be a good strategy, right, for you to discuss with your buyer, but make sure your buyer has read that initial paragraph that we just read and is prepared for escalating that price. That should happen. Okay, so the very first paragraph here, paragraph 1, the first blank that you see here on paragraph 1 is where you're going to put in the amount over any competing offer that your buyer is willing to go and can go. So if it's $185,000 competing offer and your buyer has said that they're willing to go $2,000 more than any other offer, then they're going to go $2,000 more than that, right? Or $10,000 more than that, whatever it is. So you're going to indicate in that first blank there, which is line 12, how much more they're willing to better a competing offer by. And then we've got another blank right under that on line 13, which is the maximum purchase price that it can escalate to. So you're willing to better the other offer, competing offer or offer. Well, it's going to be offer because they're going to select one as a competing offer, and you're going to better that. Your buyer is going to better that by X amount of dollars, but not to exceed this top limit, which is their very top limit bottom line that they're going to go with any other escalation. Okay, any questions on that?
So so you're giving them your top dollar. You're no longer really negotiating. It's all dictated by the
other offer. Yeah, maybe.
Maybe.
Right. Below that, paragraph 1, notice that there's 2 lines, lines 14 and 15, that say the net the term net price, because that's what we're going to be talking about with the competing offer, the term net price means the stated purchase price or the maximum price if the competing offer contains a price escalation clause. That clause within the addendum is going to show what they would go up to, right? What they would go up to. So let's say this competing offer has an escalation addendum, and in their escalation addendum it says that they'll pay, $5,000 increments all the way up to $780,000 as their max, $780,000. That $780,000 found on line 13 of the competing offer is now the purchase price, the net price that's going to escalate yours.
So what if you run into a situation where you have like the seller taking care of some closing costs, but they're rolling it into the sales price so that the buyer can finance. So now you have a sales price that isn't truly indicative of the sale price, but it sounds to me like that would escalate this.
Well, yeah, we're going to change. Yeah. So we're going to get into that a little bit later, but
okay, cool.
For sure, that's going to, be a determinant in the net price.
Got it. Awesome.
Whether it's something the seller is giving the buyer or whether it's something the buyer is taking from the seller, whatever it is in that competing offer. Yes, that's true. Okay, so now let's look at paragraph 2, which is the competing offer description. So for an offer to be looked at as a competing offer that could escalate yours, the competing offer must be a complete copy of a bona fide arm's length written offer on Northwest MLS forms or similar forms containing all material terms necessary for an enforceable agreement, which A, requires the full purchase price to be paid in cash at closing. Okay. B, provides for closing no later than 60 days, unless it's filled in differently there on your offer, to put limitations on a competing offer, right? And C, that is not contingent on the sale of the buyer's property. No 22B, right? Now you can have, and it even notes it here, you can have the competing offer can have a 22Q, and that's perfectly fine. 22Q is conditioned on the closing of an already under contract deal, and that's considered legitimate for a competing offer. Okay, so strategy-wise, if you're representing your buyer well, it might be a good idea on that line 18, where you put in, or where it defers to 60 days, closing no later than 60 days. That's kind of a late closing, isn't it? So maybe it would work to the, I'm just saying maybe. I'm asking you the question to ask yourself. Maybe it would work better to put in 30 days in that blank for the competing offer to not have a closing more than 30 days out.
John, if you're cash and you've already looked at they already looked at the pre-title, what would be the benefit of putting 30 days in there still? Wouldn't you want to go less because you're cash, you can close in 15 days or?
Well, we're talking about a competing offer. So I would think you'd want to keep it similar to yours. So if you're able to, with your buyer, if you're able to close in 30 days.
Right.
I'm saying we want to call the competing offer only a competing offer if it can close in 30 days or less.
Okay, I see. All right.
That's why I'm saying you would write that in. Okay, so so number 3 gives us a little bit of a paragraph 3, I should say, gives us a little bit of information about the use of the Form 35EN and a couple of the conditions that might generate that 35EN. So 3A says that the seller's escalation of this offer shall not be effective unless it is accompanied by a complete copy of any competing offer used to escalate the purchase price, including any escalation provision, including the name, including the price, including that buyer's address. That's how this one time a person got a hold of the other buyer, was by the address being on the competing offer, and went over to the house and bought them up. And so number 3A1, line 27, starting on line 27, says if seller fails to provide an offer to be used as a competing offer to buyer at the time of mutual acceptance, then buyer may give notice to seller of that fact. Doesn't say must, does it? It says buyer may give notice to seller of that fact within 3 days by default. If buyer fails to timely give such notice, then the buyer may be obligated to purchase at the new purchase price calculated by the seller. If buyer provides such notice, seller shall have 1 day by default to deliver the competing offer to the buyer. And if the seller fails to timely deliver the competing offer, the buyer shall be entitled to purchase the property at the non-escalated price. So whether you're the listing agent or you are the buyer's agent, you're going to want to make sure you're aware of that you know, if they don't come forward, if the listing agent doesn't come forward with that competing offer, the entire contract, then you can give notice on this form 35EN, and then as long as you do that within your 3 days, but you got to do it in 3 days. So time is of the essence, big time on this. You got to make sure you're meeting these deadlines, or it's just going with the price. And did I read where it says buyer shall be entitled to purchase the property? Yeah, at the non-escalated price. If the seller does not come forward with that competing offer. Okay, so there's some distrust that goes on with buyers when they think they're being played, they think they're being used, and I just got a complaint. One of our agents, I should say, I didn't, but one of our agents got a complaint from 2 years ago when our listing agent got competing offers, had several offers on his listing, deleted, just talked to the one they wanted, deleted this escalation addendum, and just counter offered with the highest price that one of the competing offers had. The other buyer that bought it closed, but then felt like they were being played. I was being played. There was never a competing offer. Well, they agreed to delete this, so it didn't matter. If the buyer wanted to make sure that it was going with the bumps and the competing offer and all that business, then they should have not agreed with the seller to do that. They should have just gone ahead and said, okay, then show me the competing offer. And if they couldn't do it per this paragraph we just read, then they would be able to purchase it at the non-escalated price if the seller couldn't produce it.
John, how did they wait 2 years? I mean, that didn't make any, how can you go back 2 years later?
For the auditor?
Oh, the auditor. Okay, I thought the
auditor for the DOL can go back up to 3 years.
Okay, it was the auditor. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so the buyer complained to the DOL. The DOL is doing an investigation. They're required to do investigations. So the DOL is doing this investigation and on it, and it wasn't my position to say anything because it was directly a complaint against the broker, the individual broker, but I wanted to support that broker. So I basically raised those questions to this auditor, and I said, hello, this is something the parties agreed to do. They deleted the escalation addendum because the seller didn't want to deal with it. The buyer agreed to not deal with it and just go with the highest price of what one of the other ones said. They wanted to see a copy of it, and the seller said, no, you can either go with what we got or we'll go with someone else. The ironic thing, by the way, in that investigation that I also mentioned in my letter, I said the appraisal that was done came in higher than the so-called too high of a price the buyer was complaining about. How does that work? But anyway, so that's the situation that came about because of this, and because the seller just said, let's just do away with this whole escalating business, get rid of the addendum, and we will just deal with this purchase price. And the party agreed to, and they got it for under appraised value and still complained after it closed.
So John, if you're the seller, is it better to delete it or to keep it and just fulfill it? I mean, what in your perspective now after dealing with this, is it better to keep it? Because I was told by somebody that when you come, you as a buyer, you send that in, and then when they come back with this is our final, to then send it in with that final price without the escalation.
Well, I would say that if you're going to use the escalation addendum, whether and you begin negotiating with the escalation addendum, I would say that at some point you can't just, I'd say it's best to go through and follow through with it all if you've already started. But if you're at the beginning and you're making a decision, I don't think these escalation addendums are very good to use. I'm not going to use it as a seller. That's the seller's choice. But to the seller, if they can escalate that buyer's price with another offer and escalate it up, why not, right? But then you've got to, make sure you're using the other offer and using this thing we're just talking about right here, this mechanism right here, which is the Form 22EN, to demand proof of it, to get a copy of that entire contract, make sure it's bona fide. Okay, and that's where the suspicions of this one buyer came, were because they just did away with it and they never got a chance to see the competing offer.
So I want to make sure I understand the scenario you're talking about. So basically, their complaint wasn't valid because the addendum wasn't executed. It wasn't part of the executable contract. So I guess my question is that always how it works? If you had something in a contract, but that's not how the contract was executed, they can't, a situation just like this, some addenda that you haven't fulfilled, but it's not in the executed contract. So every time it's all about what's been executed, right?
Right.
Cool.
So because if there's a portion of it that wasn't accepted by both parties, we didn't have mutual, instead it was deleted, and that was by mutual agreement, it doesn't exist.
Makes sense to me.
As far as the contract goes, right? Okay, so let's look down at 3B that says, again, this is notice to seller, non-qualifying competing offer. So this is the situation where if the seller sends in the listing agent sends you their paragraph 4 on page 2 that shows the calculations and where they've come up with this higher price and the competing offer for that. But you go over it with your buyer and you and your buyer say, you know what, that isn't right. That isn't right. That's not the right calculation. So you would send the 22 EN. It says here on line 34 that if the offer provided by the seller does not qualify as a competing offer under paragraph 2 of this addendum, buyer may deliver notice to seller of that fact within 3 days, if not filled in, of receipt of the competing offer. If buyer fails to timely give such notice, the offer shall conclusively be deemed to qualify as a competing offer under paragraph 2 of this addendum. So the burden is on the buyer to get in your 35 EN disagreement, or it's going to be too late, right? And then the second one says that the buyer provides such notice to the seller shall have 2 days to give notice of termination of this agreement. If the seller timely gives notice, the earnest money is refunded to the buyer. The seller does not timely give notice of termination, then the buyer shall be entitled to purchase the property at the non-escalated purchase price. So as a listing agent, as a buyer's agent, man, you got to be on top of this and making sure you're responding within your timelines.
So John, this is Hillary. I have a question, and maybe it's the next page or something. I'm not quite sure. But let's say you have a cash offer that's not as high as the escalation, but your client can choose any offer. They don't have to choose the offer based on the escalation price.
Correct.
So that's you still have to provide all this background and, like, hey, this is the offer. If they asked for it, this is the offer we took. It's a non-qualifying kind of competing offer.
Well, when the seller chooses an offer to take,
mm-hmm.
they might take that offer because the buyer's likelihood of closing seems greater, right? They have a better job, more money or cash.
Or they have better cash. They have the cash offer.
Yeah, whatever, right? So they may take the offer because of it. You don't need to ever tell someone why it is. You just say, we've taken another offer, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So with that offer, if it had an escalation addendum in it, okay, then of course you can escalate the price on it. You've chosen and you've gotten the best, what you consider the best buyer because they've got the best possibility of closing, right? They got the better job or the better money or whatever it is, income or whatever, best qualifications financially. So you take that offer, now it can be escalated by another offer, even though that buyer may be a flake buyer.
Okay, let me try to figure that out in my head just real quick if we have a second. So if I'm a listing agent, my seller chose a price that's lower than that they sold. Let's say they chose $150,000, right? As a buying agent, I had an escalation clause of 150, but I'll go up every 5 up to 200, right? Okay, but my seller decided to choose this $150,000 one because it was closing faster, right? It's closing faster. So me as a buying agent, do I say, hey, show me that competing offer within a couple days? And even though that competing offer is lower, as long as they show it over, then that's what it is.
Yeah, but the listing agent has to show you the competing offer. That's correct. But
only if the buyer requests it, right?
Correct. Well, no, it says that it's supposed to be given, right? It says you have to do it, but like you're saying, it does also say here in the very bottom of our first page of this, that if the buyer has requested to see that competing offer and you don't provide it, then the buyer gets the property at the non-escalated price.
But if the buyer doesn't request it, so let's say if the buyer doesn't request it, you don't have to provide it.
Well, the seller can request it. So going back to the prior paragraph, so the seller can request that the the first buyer can always request that, and the seller's escalation of the offer is not effective unless it is accompanied by, and this is what it says in lines 24, 25, 26, unless it is accompanied by a competing offer, right? Escalating.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it does have to be accompanied with that by that competing offer. But again, to see that competing offer, to know that it in fact exists and it's being accurately used to escalate the price, this is where the buyer can call them on the carpet and say, okay, well, here's my notice, my 35 EN. I want to see that competing offer. I want to know that it exists and that it's a bona fide one. So with that question, let's look at page 2, and this is number 4, paragraph number 4. It says new purchase price. So the listing agent is going to, basically, has got the competing offer that they're going to use. It's going to escalate it really high. They've chosen the buyer who's got the really great income and the great qualifications and cash and everything. And they've chosen that buyer who had a lower price, but we're willing to escalate quite a bit. And then this other offer that had come in is going to escalate it to a price that makes that seller happy. So they go ahead and take that lower offer knowing they can escalate. Okay, that listing agent is going to have to look and make sure that that is a bona fide offer that falls within the criteria described there in paragraph 2 for competing offer, right? And so as long as it qualifies as a competing offer, then that listing agent is safe in going ahead and using it and accepting the buyer who is financially strongest. And then the listing agent is going to have to calculate here in paragraph 4, and it's just adding this stuff up, adding and subtracting whatever it is. You're going to put in the competing offer, and that's going to include, as it says in parentheses, or the maximum purchase price of the competing offer if it's contained, if it's got an escalation provision. And then you're going to subtract any credits to the buyer. You're going to add credits to the seller and the competing offer, both of these. So you're going to do just like you had asked about earlier, Alexander, right? About adding those or subtracting those, so you come out with the competing offer net purchase price. Then you're going to add the escalation from this offer, what they agreed to. If they said they would beat it by 2,000, now you got to add 2,000, right? And then you're going to add or subtract any credits on this offer, on our offer, right, to come up with the new purchase price. Now that's done, that's going to have to be delivered, to the other agent to show that we have agreement on this new purchase price, and that buyer, to give that buyer a chance to send the 35 EN and say, no, I'm looking at this and your competing contract, is for an owner contract not closing for 90 days. it wouldn't qualify, or it is a contingent deal using Form 22A or whatever it be. And you've got to object to it with the Form 20 or 35 EN and get that back to them within how many days? Pretty quick, I think, 3 days. And then the 3 days. And then the seller just has 1 day, to make good on it, right? To show why that's not true, or to terminate. I guess down here at the bottom of the first page of this escalation addendum, the seller's remedies here is to terminate. The buyer gets their earnest money back. Or if the seller doesn't give notice of termination, then the buyer can proceed with the non-escalated price.
John, I have a question, if I may.
Sure.
So I have had a listing this weekend. Home was listed for $475, and we had a time for all offers to be presented by 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon. Okay, and so we get a couple of different offers. Let's say, one offer says I'm willing to pay up to $500,000, but then we get another offer that's with an escalation says about $1,000 over, up to $510, and another one says $7,000. Do you do the nets on all of these to justify the highest price now, which can be very confusing? Interestingly enough, on this particular transaction, I got a call at 5:30 from another agent who had sent an offer. It did not meet the timeline, but she had some problems with AuthentiSign or something of that sort. And I told her every offer that is submitted must be presented. It did not meet the 3 o'clock timeline, right? As it turned out, it was a flat offer that had no escalation clause, and they were willing to escalate, or another buyer was interesting to escalate $5,000 over the next highest offer. Real clean. All we did was, and the final selling price was $535, right? $530. It was $530. Thank goodness that agent presented that offer. It didn't meet the timeline, but she presented it. It was in my email. I had to send it to the seller, but it was a little bit simpler.
Well, yeah, and
that offer.
Okay.
Do you take each offer to escalated one above the other to generate the final offer?
No, because you're gonna choose, the seller's gonna choose one offer that they're gonna accept, and it can be escalated by one other offer. So you choose the one that's going to be the one that's going to escalate it.
Yes.
So as long as you're doing that, then you're good.
Yeah.
There could be 30 other offers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the seller's going to choose the one that they want to accept, and then they're going to, if it's got escalation addendum, then they're going to choose the best offer to escalate that.
And then there was one offer that was willing to escalate $7,000 over the next highest. But one of the things that he had on although he waived the inspection contingency, he set 0 timelines, which in other words, how there's time to respond on certain kinds. He said 0 timelines. So it was like, the inspection, as is, and we were concerned about that. The winning offer simply waived his inspection clean. So that was one of the reasons why we went with the offer that we did.
Yeah. And don't forget, just that in all of this, don't forget that one of our concerns for our sellers should be post-closing. What could happen post-closing? Okay, so if you hear a buyer talking about, you know, litigation and, you know,
Yeah, really.
and issues they've got with, you know, with some of the conditions and all these kind of things, but they've waived their inspections, you know, might not be the best buyer, but your seller is the one who's going to decide that. And you're their consultant. You're there to talk to them about it and help them work through it. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Do you have time for a question based on Kathy's example? So, Kathy, so when you call the winning buyer, say, yay, they got it. So then you immediately send over the calculation page and the offer that didn't get the escalation, you know, didn't get
Correct.
that,
Yeah.
right?
It's being used to escalate. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then you meet it, and then after that, it's really in the buyer and the buyer agent's hands if they want more information.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But if you had gotten an offer in at 535, highest and best, nothing would, and no escalations, you know, there were escalations, but maybe only escalated to 530 and not 535, you wouldn't have to do anything, right? You just tell the winning offer 535. And if the buyers wanted to see it, they, you know, they do whatever they need to do. But okay.
Well, I not necessarily, because I want to go back just with that question. I want to go back to paragraph 1 that says if seller receives a competing offer for the property prior to accepting this offer with a net price equal to or greater than the net price of this offer, then the net price of this offer shall be increased.
Oh, that answers my question. Cool.
Okay, so it's really important to watch, you know, that wording, and then it says that the term net price means the stated purchase price, including the adjustment of buyers. I'm looking for the term. A competing offer must be a complete copy. A competing offer must be a complete copy of a bona fide arm's length written offer. And so I would say it has to accompany it.
I sent the whole thing.
Okay, good. But if
I was just saying is if one came in higher than all the escalation clauses, you know, it's like, hey, 535, nobody escalated past 530. You wouldn't have to do that because it came in at highest and best and it was beating out all the escalation clauses.
Right.
Okay, that's not okay. You don't have to prove anything there.
No. Okay, so that's and I like that, you know, that Hillary, that you were talking about her example. So you know, pick out some examples out of the MLS, a couple of listings or something, and then play out a scenario for yourself, how you would deal with this, so that when this situation, not if, but when the situation comes up, you're ready, you know, and you've gone through a worksheet, so to speak, and you've done this. So this used to be just a word of warning, this little calculation part. As of 2 years ago, it was not part of the actual contract. I mean, it was here, but it specifically stated this is just a worksheet only, is not contractual. Okay, that changed 2 years ago when they redid the forms, and this is now contractually a part of it. So this math is part of this contract. If this math was done wrong, then it's in the buyer's. Then it is the buyer's responsibility and the buyer's agent's responsibility to respond back with that Form 35EN and calling them out on it, saying, no, it's not, you know, and then you go from there. So
John, you know, I don't know where I got it, but I've got a nice Excel spreadsheet where you can lay all of the offers out. We got 7 offers.
Yeah, that's what, you know, and that's what most listing agents do, you know, to be able to do that with their sellers and go over it with their sellers and stuff. And if you don't, it can get real confusing real fast.
Yeah.
With 7 offers. For me, it happens with 3 offers or 2 offers. You know, but at 7, it becomes really complicated.
A quick question on that. It has to be identical, meaning that it has the same forms. So if one is waiving something.
Oh, no, it says, I'm sorry, but it says at the very beginning of this whole form, it says, giving the buyer a warning, it says that this addendum does not assure that the competing offer used to establish a purchase price will in all ways be comparable to yours. It may be different. So we're mostly talking about the net price. Boils down to the net
price. But if one waives one item, like the inspections, then, but it's similar in price, similar in every aspect, but doesn't waive, or it does waive, then that's something that you have to take into.
Sure. So as a seller, I might want to take the offer that maybe he's waiving their inspection, right? And maybe he's not as high initial of a price, but has an escalation addendum attached. And so now I've got a competing offer who's asking for all kinds of scrutiny and inspections and everything else that I'm not going to take, but I'm going to use them as a escalator, you know, as a competing offer that's going to escalate.
You can use that person.
Sure.
I would say that as a listing agent, you couldn't, or I mean, as the buying agent, you couldn't use that one to escalate mine because it's not the same. Because when it
says they're not the same. It says it right on the very beginning of the form. I just read it.
Because once you get into, you know, inspection, you could spend $10,000 off the roof because it needs a new roof.
Yeah.
And then you lose that sale.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
It's
so Kelly, there's flaws, aren't there?
Yes.
There's flaws in this, and that's one of the reasons the Northwest MLS doesn't recommend it. You're right. But that's how it is.
On this transaction that came in, they did waive the inspection. And there was another one that would have been $2,000 higher, but they, waiving the inspection that they had, they were limiting the time. No, they had time frame. They were limiting the time frame for the inspection like to 1 day. So it's kind of like and it just was too risky. I had another transaction a few years ago where a buyer came in way over the asking price, but was also an FHA with like 3% down, as opposed to another buyer that came in with I think it was it sold for $425, and they came in with $200,000 down, and still escalated. But I was certain that it would appraise at that much higher value than the one that was even great, $75,000 over, and with very little skin in the games for the appraisal.
Right.
Those days we had appraisals.
Yeah.
Appraisals.
Right. So one of the things we got to be careful about as the agent, especially as a listing agent, is trying to predict things. Of course, our job is to anticipate issues and problems that come up and prepare our client for issues and problems that could possibly come up, but not to just assume that it's going to happen. We always want to make them aware of it. So that was a good job. Okay, so just wanted to finish up by saying that on the last page of this escalation addendum, because it's not an escalation clause, is it? So on this escalation addendum, the very bottom there says that if that calculation done by the listing agent is incorrect, the buyer can deliver that form 35EN within 3 days. And then it says that if the buyer fails to timely give such notice, the new purchase price stated above shall conclusively be deemed to be correct. So the buyer's got to object to that miscalculated purchase price, or they're just going to have to buy it at that price. And then below that, it says that if the buyer provides such notice to the seller shall have 2 days to give notice of termination of this agreement. So the buyer's got to know that this, one of the consequences of their objecting to the calculation is that they could just have the deal terminated on them by the seller. Right? I kind of don't like that, but that's a possibility here. It says if the seller timely provides such notice, the earnest money shall be refunded to the buyer. If seller does not timely give notice of termination, then the buyer's calculated new purchase price and the buyer's notice shall conclusively be deemed to be correct. So seller, listing agent can send this calculation to you as a buyer's agent. You as a buyer's agent can recalculate it basically and send it back with a 22EN within 3 days, right? And so, it's not an exact science, but I don't know that they're going to be able to get much better than they've gotten it to at this point, other than maybe putting in some provisos for like what Kelly was talking about. But I don't know if we want to get into that, because then it gets into some technicalities about different issues and things. But in general, that's what it is. So my general summary would be, if you're representing the buyer and you're in a multiple offer situation, I think this can be effective for your buyer as long as your buyer is willing to do it and understands that this could escalate on.
Mm-hmm. So as a listing agent, obviously you could go back to agents and ask for their highest and best. Do you have to do, if you have 7 listings, do you have to ask all of them for their highest and best? Or could you simply negotiate by sending the highest offer to the agent and say, would your buyer be willing to just create a highest and best? We have this offer in hand, but rather than deal with these potential things down the road, can you just write?
Well, I would have some conversations. As a listing agent, I would have some conversations with the other agents. I would keep them all apprised of what's going on, for sure. I would say, you know what, we got multiple. I got 7 offers.
Yeah.
And right now yours ain't in the ballpark.
Yeah.
So I might suggest that you get moving on this thing, if you want to be competitive in this, because we're going to be reviewing the offers. I was observing last night, yesterday, I was observing one of our agents who was actually directing my daughter's and her husband's purchase of a house. And so I was listening to the communications going on with the listing agent and our agent, who I happen to live with. so I couldn't help but hear. So I was listening in to the whole thing. And so she was my daughter was, her and her husband wanted this house bad, and they were, every time the listing agent would say, well, they got to be willing to bring in a 22 AD with a $5,000 thing on there, and my daughter said, yep, we'll do it, and all the different things. And she was just wanting. And so there was a lot of conversation. My point is, there was a lot of conversation that went on, and ultimately the conversation with our agent, who is representing my daughter, was strong enough, was good enough, that it impressed the agent, and the other agent took that offer. So that was pretty sweet.
Mhm, mhm.
But that conversation was really important. And I listened to that listing agent talking, and he was, you know, he was trying to make sure that all buyers knew what was going on and they needed to do their best.
I did get a follow-up phone call. Of course, I was getting texts the following morning and all that kind of stuff. And we were still finalizing certain kinds of things with the agent. I called the agent that had presented the best offer, of course, that evening, but had some other things to discuss. And I had texts from agents but I did put together an email to all of them saying we have accepted an offer. We had 7 offers. The highest offer was blah, 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 just to keep them all, you know, informed and thanking them for their very nice offers. But I got one call from an agent early Saturday morning, and she said, well, why didn't you call me? Blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, we're still finalizing certain kinds of things in this. But she was really very upset because I don't know. I should have called her immediately and let her know that she was not successful. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and it can become really emotional. So that's why I do think it's important that
buyers do. It's frustrating. It's frustrating.
Keep them all on equal footing to have the opportunity to bring in their best, you know, and then if they don't, and they complain later, you can say, I told you to bring in your best. Someone else beat you. Okay, so kept you right to the minute, 3 o'clock. So I appreciate you joining in with this. I hope this has been a helpful discussion with everybody. And
thank you.
Thank you, John.
Great class, John. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Have a great day.